What's happening right now is that the white Satanists are throwing the black Satanists under the bus, setting them on fire in order to create a decoy whilst they rearrange the furniture in the basement. So this stuff gets very spooky. People don't want to go here. They don't want to pay attention, but they're going to have to, because in the next 12, 18, 24 months, it's all coming out.
This is part 3 with Sacha Stone. We're going to break down a lot of the stuff. There was some plates in the air that needed to land. We didn't know how they were going to land. We didn't know if Darth Vader was Sacha Stone's father, things like that. But this is part 3 in the trilogy. I don't know if it's climactic, but it really goes in some really interesting rabbit holes, and I think you're like it. Part 3, Sacha Stone. John.
I'm always curious geographically.
The Mayan Riviera. I'm at our headquarters on the Laguna Bacala in
Oh,
Mexico.
nice.
Oh man.
What time is it there?
Headed to Bucharest tonight. Have to say, headed to Bucharest tonight for a few days. Then Portugal, then Istanbul next week, and then I start touring in the UK end of the month.
Okay.
Nice.
Well, thank you again for spending time with us, Sacha. We really appreciate it.
Yes, we do.
I would like to circle back. Well, let me start with the question that I was actually most interested in way back when we started was the way I discovered you was through watching Robert David Steele. This was like, 4 years ago or more, and Cynthia McKinney, and I knew that you were part of that tour. And I just wondered if you could, first of all, I don't know, have you had any contact lately with Cynthia McKinney? Because she kind of just disappeared after all of that happened. And if you could maybe tell us a little more detail about what happened during that tour and what happened with Robert, honestly. So
sure. And curious enough, I just finished my US social tour for the last five and a half weeks a few days ago, and got back here to Mexico. And along the path, a lot of people were asking me the same question, so it's kind of fresh in my head. No, I've had no dealings with Cynthia McKinney. I found her to be quite an interesting individual, to be sure. Very, very bright woman. I've had a few conversations with her through Robert back in the day. He was bringing her in as a commissioner onto the ITNJ, but she proved to be quite skittish, quite understandably. I mean, and didn't really come forward in any capacity as a commissioner. So that was really the last of my dealings with her. And Steele also brought forward a couple of others like Bill Binney and others onto the commission, who again didn't really amount to a hill of beans on the commission because of the way things went with the commission. But Steele on the tour had approached me after we'd done the disclosure, Dimensions of Disclosure conference together in California a few years back. I had engineered that particular piece so that he and I were on stage together at a given point. We were good friends. And I'll just go slightly back first. He approached me in 2015 and asked me if I would help get him out of his basement. So he was in his basement in a somewhat loveless marriage, being sent 2 plates of food down a day by his wife. But other than that, estranged from the family. And very brilliant mind, very analytical mind. Obviously, he's very schooled in his CIA stuff, and as a case analyst, able to exercise remarkable mental dexterity. And that was clear to anyone who spoke to him, even at that time, that he had a very brilliant mind, but not many social graces, it has to be said. Now, so we'd become somewhat friendly, and he'd said to me, "Oh, you've got to get me out of this basement, put me, use me. I need to get out there. And I started working a little bit with him in that context. So I guess grooming him, I then brought him forward recommended him as chief counsel for the International Tribunal for Natural Justice in 2018, the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking and Child Sex Abuse. That was his bugbear. That element of research had become his big thing, the children. And it was, I believe it was me who brought his attention to that subject. So that's how it worked. We did the Dimensions of Disclosure conference. He jumped on stage with me. It was an interesting double act with a fat, bald, retired spy and a kind of derelict shock poet like me. It was an interesting combo on the stage. It went down very well and got a standing ovation. And after that, Robert Steele was like, "Oh, we've got to go on the road. We've got to do it." And I said, I'd rather shoot myself in the face than go on the road with you, Robert. I've done a fair bit of touring in the past, and you've got to get on with people really well.
Yeah. A question about Robert Steele. I think I know who he is. Greg has been telling me a little bit about him. Did he live up in the Pacific Northwest? It was Washington, Oregon, or Northern California, and Washington. And he used to give lectures on individual sovereignty and how to. Is this the individual that I'm speaking of?
Robert David Steele is a former CIA and actually a very, very brilliant one who then became a kind of deep state whistleblower, and then rounding up all of his mates in the basement to also come out. So yeah, he had look, the guy was very brilliant in his way, but he was obstreperous, pugnacious, belligerent, and no social graces. So he burnt more bridges than he built, unfortunately. And that was where
Oh, the audio cut out.
Yeah, something happened. I saw
Sacha.
the mine changed too.
Yours, Sacha, your audio cut out for a second.
You're gonna have to type it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Now we hear you.
Sorry, we lost
Could you say that again? We
30
missed
seconds
all of
ago,
that.
probably.
Right. So well, just going back to Robert David Steele was very brilliant. What he brought to the world, as far as I'm concerned, in essence, was true cost economics and open source everything.
Yes.
And that was brilliant. That was a classic way of how his very brilliant brain deduced very complex geopolitical and socioeconomic and socio-ecological problems and broke them down to very simple strap lines. So what do we mean by true cost economics? I'll tell you straight up. My gig in Ohio a couple of weeks ago, on the way to the theater, I picked up an apple. I bought an apple on the side of the street for $3. That's what it cost me to buy a big red apple from a street vendor. $3. And that was perfect. I was expecting 50 cents. $3 was better. I walked onto the stage and I held up the apple and I said, "Shame on you," to the audience. This cost me $3. How the f did we get to the place where we pay $3 for a goddamn apple? Have you ever stopped to think about the true value of an apple? It's zero. Go and pick it off a tree.
There's thousands on a single tree. On a single tree, there's thousands of apples. Just,
right. So your freightage and cold storage and transport and logistics and taxes and all the conflated bullshit, you get $3 for an apple. So true cost economics is how we explore the journey between an insane scenario, economic scenario, and the real value of life. So that's the kind of thing that Robert David Steele was brilliant at. And then open source engineering, talking about literally giving open source engineering to the world on everything and let everyone build everything. Brilliant idea. So getting rid of copyrights and patents in that sense, and downsizing the technocracy and the bureaucracy of our lives, which is strangling us. In any event, going back to him briefly, just to round it off, after the Dimension of Disclosure thing, he wanted to tour. I did not want to tour with him. Lockdown happened in 2020. And at the end of 2020, in early 21, he contacted me again. We'd been in touch variously because he interviewed me every 2 or 3 months. And he said, "Look, lockdown's ending, come to the US. I really want to do this tour." And I said, "I'll do it if I control the narrative and if I invite the speakers, because I know them all, the good frontline activists and advocates in the sovereignty movement and in peace activism and medical health sovereignty, so on." And we agreed. So I said, "You run the books. I'll do the ident. I designed it. I named it Arise Resurrection Tour. I created all the graphics. I invited 85% of the speakers were my stable. And we began the tour. He ran the books. I said, just pay my technical crew and make sure that I don't pick up any bottom line, and I'm good. I didn't even ask for any fee to be paid because I don't take money for my activism, never did. And I ended up costing me $75,000 out of my pocket to keep the tour going, because 2 weeks into the tour, Robert David Steele became this, combination of P.T. Barnum and some, commandant at a boot camp, just bullying the hell out of everyone on the tour. The truckers hated him.
Wow.
The technical crew couldn't stand him. None of the speakers wanted to be near him. He was literally farting on stage and thinking that was amusing. And
dear.
a little pig under his arm called Miss Piggy, and an alter ego. And it just wasn't working.
Wow.
And then he was screaming at everyone, including Lee Dundas, the prosecutor, attorney, come advocate, and ended up throwing her off her bus. $5 million tour buses, fully wrapped with all the graphics. It was just absurd. It was a shit show. And I said to him, day one, we need one bus and a couple of technical crew in behind us. But no, $3 million was raised, or some insane amount of money, mostly on my name. We know because donors coming into the website could attribute their donations to Sacha Stone, Juan O'Savin, Charlie Ward, Simon Parks, Robert Steele, whatever. And I believe I've raised most of the money, which I told him was the case. I said, I've got a very good relationship with Middle America. And he poo-pooed the idea. Oh, please, you're a long-haired internationalist, that this is a Patriots tour. I said, Robert, you'll find out soon enough. It got really bad. He went mad, essentially threw Lee Dundas off the tour one morning, and her suitcases were on the pavement outside the hotel in Dallas. And I phoned him and I said, you pushed it too far. She gets back on the bus. And he said, no, she doesn't. And if you don't like it, you can leave too. This tour is bigger than you. And I said, I think you'll find otherwise. And I marched down to the lobby. Scott McKay and his Navy SEALs were down there with their fingers twitching at their guns. And about, 30 or 40 other people witnessed this. And I had him up against the wall. And I threatened to break his jaw if he continued, because he was about to destroy the peace movement.
Wow.
We'd just begun this incredible resurrection, this revival, and consolidating 30 or 40 of the top advocates for peace and health sovereignty. We'd lined them all up. The tour was a beautiful thing. And, he was just going insane and thinking it was all about him, and the money went to his head. And, he was living on, 40 cans of Diet Pepsi a day and Subway sandwiches. So he couldn't handle this. He didn't know how to handle money, how to handle fame, how to handle logistics at that level. And it all got to him. And he just became this wounded 14-year-old boy with a pea shooter. And I threatened, I just said, what are you doing, Robert? I literally pinned him against the wall. I said, the devil's got into you, man. Stop. Just stop. And he couldn't. And he carried on swaggering and yelling and hurling abuse. So we let him peel off. We all left the tour that day in Dallas. And Lee Dundas.
Do you remember what that was? Or roughly, anyway?
I can't remember. Lee Dundas, Scott McKay, myself sat in the lobby and in the conference room at the hotel in Dallas and drew up our own plans. And that afternoon instituted the Arise Freedom Tour, just changed the branding and put it out on social media that we were going off in this direction. Steele and $5 million buses was going in that direction. And I was desperately sad, because you got to understand, I love this guy. He was a friend, and I was the only person who really could put up with his belligerence. But I was deeply saddened. But off he went, and we peeled off in our direction. It took us about 5 or 6 days to get into the pace of what we were doing, just literally announcing, okay, we're going to be turning up at such and such a place, at such and such a farm, or such and such a location. And we were just literally on the hoof, producing the tour. Within 2 weeks, for sure, 3 weeks, all the audiences were coming to us, and no one was turning up at his. He had to let the buses go. He ran out of money. He was humiliated. And he was ending up standing on stage to empty venues. And it ended up with him with I think a handful of people sat around a table in a Holiday Inn kind of deal. That was the end of the ignominious ending of the Arise Resurrection tour. Whereas our Arise Freedom tour went from strength to strength, and we had huge audiences, and we finished what we started, basically. So truth prevailed in that sense, and integrity of mission prevailed. And Steele, I did say to Steele, the last thing I said to him in front of witnesses was, and this is where there's a lot of controversy, I said, the devil has got into you. I can see it in your left eye. And I said, if you don't drop this, it's going to come back on you. You'll be dead before the end of the tour, the way you're going. No man can do this, can sustain this level of pressure, bad diet. It's going to kill you. You're not well enough, mind, body, or soul, to conduct yourself this way. So that was a bit predictive, I guess, but he did indeed die. I can't remember when it was, but it was more or less
in a couple months,
the end of the tour, which was supposed to be September 11th. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was very, very sad, although no one was surprised. It's one of those things. And it was a sad and ignominious end to a very short-lived but brilliant activism career for a man who had also fucked up in life hugely as an alcoholic and a belligerent, angry father to his children who wouldn't even talk to him in the end. And
wow,
just sad.
I had a question about, was he like high strung and just like naturally like day in, day out? And was he drinking on the tour?
No, I don't remember him drinking at all, but a couple of idiot people who stayed on the tour with him, and I'm not going to name them here because it's not what I do, two individuals who I foundationally hold responsible for the tragedy, and Scott McKay and others feel the same way. And curiously enough, a month ago, 3 weeks ago, on my tour, when I was in Atlanta, this little social tour I've just done. In Atlanta, I turned up and there was a guy, Mark, an elder, in his RV, who had been the kind of scout for Robert's tour and had been with Robert all the way to the end of his tour. And it's the first time I'd seen Mark since being on the road in 2021. And he's now joined my crew, incidentally. But Mark was on the road with Steele right to the very end, and he corroborated everything that I had thought had been going on. Just one of those sad, curious things. I mean, life and fate has a way of doing that to all of us, delivering unto us exactly the geometry of our, of what's due to us. But it was sad in this particular case because it looked as though at the beginning of the tour, I'd said to Steele, Robert, at the end of this tour, I'm going to make you look like Moses, but you've got to rein in your bad manners, your pomposity, because people can't stand it. And I said, good Midwestern Christian patriots are not going to tolerate this kind of level of behavior. The truck drivers might enjoy it, but please rein it in. But we'd had that problem with him even in Westminster, London, even when we'd gone down to Dartington Hall, I remember, with our Chief Justice and the Bishop of Jerusalem after the judicial inquiry at Westminster. We'd gone down to Dartington Hall to do a public event in the countryside in England. And I remember he'd farted all the way down there as well and thought it was hilarious. It's just like, oh, God, stop. In any event, that's how I remember Robert David Steele.
So it was a couple months. The last time you saw him was a couple months before he died. Or not,
I saw him. I saw him whenever the date was in Dallas, Texas. That should be a matter of public record. It was the last. It was 3 weeks or something into the Arise Resurrection tour, 2 or 3 weeks in when we all peeled off and he went off on his direction.
And did Cynthia McKinney go with him then, or did she?
No,
just
she
disappear?
didn't. And to her credit, I have to say, Cynthia has clearly a very good. Cynthia had toured with him a couple of years earlier. They'd done some kind of a roadshow tour, which had also ended in, I believe, in a bit of a fail, and not through any fault of Cynthia's. She's a very brilliant woman, but it had not ended too well.
I would like to see her get involved again. It just seems like she's kind of.
I don't think she's interested. I think Cynthia McKinney is a very smart woman. I think she stepped back from the Washington shit show as a former congresswoman. I think she.
It's hard to blame her.
Yeah.
Now tell me about Scott. Is he this? Would go by the name?
McKay?
Patriot Street Fighter.
Yes.
Yes, Scott
Yeah, I
McKay.
like him a lot. What's he like on the road?
Scott McKay is probably my best friend.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah,
have many friends, but he's probably my best friend. And we have a very close and very loving relationship. And he to me is just a stand-up individual with 2.5 testicles.
Yes, exactly.
And
That's exactly
you know,
it.
and his whole position is
He's
like
not afraid
mine.
enough of it. Yeah.
His position is like mine. It's steel curtain. He doesn't negotiate what he understands to be truth. He doesn't negotiate integrity or truth. I adore the
I
man.
think he got that from his dad, and he spoke highly of his dad, and he passed away.
I knew the general.
Okay.
I knew the general. And the general died on our tour, as did 6 other or 5 other. Yeah.
Well, moving on, I guess I wanted to go back. In part 1, we talked about your growing up, and I just wanted to hit that again. You talked about you grew up in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And of course, Zimbabwe is a big deal for those of us who are following the currency wars and looking at the Zimbabwe notes and all those kinds of things. And I just wanted your take on all of that.
I'll try and pot boil it down. I mean, when you raise the specter of the Zimbabwean note, and I'm a billionaire or trillionaire actually in Zimbabwe, as you probably are. I mean, quite literally in my wallet over there, I've got a few $1 trillion worth of Zimbabwean currency, only because they were gifted to me along my touring. But it's a totemistic. The collapse of the economy in Zimbabwe to the most derelict currency ever printed on the face of the earth is a counterpoint to the fact that Rhodesia was the richest country in Africa and with GDP probably in the world at a given point back in the day, in the 60s. Rhodesia was the jewel in the crown in that sense. And Rhodesia then in 1965 declared independence against the crown. So can you imagine how the Midnight Masons in Whitehall felt about that?
We're too happy.
They wanted to punish the white pioneer settlers in England, in Rhodesia, for daring to U-turn on the crown. So they began a vehement campaign to destroy and take down the white community who had declared independence against the Crown of England. And it took them a few years to foment that, which was an extension actually of the Cold War being played out in Africa, in a very resource-rich continent. And so it ended up being the Crown of England or forces, let's just say the Sabbatean forces behind the Crown Vatican enterprise, financing drug-fueled and young teenagers from Mozambique and Angola, the neighboring countries, giving guns to them and grenades, and telling them to go and massacre and murder the small white community in Rhodesia. So that's the war I grew up in. Was a vicious bush war, hand-to-hand combat, where us whiteskins were being murdered in our beds.
Did any people that you knew personally were they killed or
yes, of
wounded?
course. For God's sake, I mean, there was a very small white population. We all, one quarter to the next quarter, had family members and friends falling constantly. Yes, it was like my childhood was proliferated with that stuff, with airplanes crashing and with dams being blown up and with, neighbors being massacred and finding out when you went back to school after the exeat that so-and-so wasn't coming back again. That was, and, living behind grenade screens, and which is what we did for our entire childhood. And that was just the way it was at that time until the end of the war, which is when Bishop Muzorewa was installed as a precursor to Robert Mugabe coming in. And that was the end of that piece. And then that began this dismal spiral of Rhodesia being this flourishing economic prospect into Zimbabwe being, what it became and is today, which is the very bottom of the pile, despite the fact that the gold is still there, the diamonds are still there.
That's what I wanted to ask. So what do you think the prospects are for Zimbabwe's currency and all of the things that are coming forth, are you optimistic about Zimbabwe in particular, or is that just that whole Zimbabwe note thing, just nothing really?
I've been meaning to go back, and I will. I don't think it'll happen before next year, but I am planning to go back and do some horse trading with the government. I'm in a position to do it. I have the diplomatic credentials to do it. And I'm just gauging. I'm gauging the mood, the political mood. I was a advisor briefly to the former prime minister who fell under Mugabe when they fell apart. You know, I've not turned my back on Africa, on my own country. It's just that it's such an orchestration and such a shit show that it made little to no sense to try and get involved in any way, shape, or form. But I am beginning to think that that's going to happen because Africa is roundabout now getting back off its knees. And I know because I've spoken to sufficient hereditary leaders, elders and leaders, paramount chiefs and kings and queens in Africa. I've literally met dozens and dozens of them over the course of the last few years, mostly remotely on Zoom calls, in my slow incremental building up of something called the World Hereditary Council, which we're announcing later this year. Certainly by I think by September, the World Hereditary Council will be fully instituted and be very visible. But it's something I've been working on for, I can't remember, about 5 or 6 years. So I've met with many hereditary leaders and elders, some in the flesh, Rajas and Sultans and so on, but most of them I've met remotely and started to build a consensus. What about if we do establish a World Hereditary Council? What about if we do allow this council to stand up and make proclamations representing, as it does, hundreds of millions of human beings? So that's basically, I'm just taking away multilateral administration that I learned from the United Nations metric and saying, well, the United Nations is the registered entity that is registered to Regis the king, to Rex the king, to the crown, to Cronus the crown, TikTok, the archons, Cronus the crown, the titan that devoured its own young. All of that is what sits behind the United Nations and registration of that venal institution. So how about a body politic of living sons and daughters of God, hereditary elders and leaders,
like the Hopi that you met, like the Hopi elders you met.
How about they come together and stand up and declare that we're going to now? You get where I'm going with the World Hereditary Council.
Yeah, I think you just publicly announced it just now.
Not really.
No,
I mean, it would have to be a big,
tease
announcement with a lot of not mink vermin, but we'll do a big, spectacular summit.
I've got another question about just Southern Africa in general, and South Africa in particular. We've been hearing a lot about this hatred of the blacks towards the whites, and the white farmers are, being murdered and all this kind of stuff. And when I hear this, I think, okay, the people that foment hatred like this are not the players that are doing the actions. They're the people behind the scenes who are causing people to hate each other so much. And I just wondered if did you see that hatred between blacks and whites when you were growing up?
No.
Okay. And is it getting better, or is it still bad?
So, brother, I'm not qualified to speak at length on this. I'll keep it very brief. I have not been in sub-Saharan Africa recently, not for years. I am not qualified to speak to what's going on today, but I will express what I knew. I lived through apartheid. I witnessed it firsthand. I witnessed the relationships between the blacks and the whites in Rhodesia in the 1970s, and it was connected and loving. My nannies were the formative influence in my childhood. And
they were black?
Yes. And my relationship with all of our staff was so loving and so kind. And the only time I ever saw my grandfather cry, was when one of our staff had a brain aneurysm and died in the back of the car on the way to the hospital. having said that, in South Africa, when I went to South Africa after the end of the Rhodesian War, it was apartheid and it was ugly. And I remember on occasion taking blacks into my house to stay overnight because they were unable to get back to the townships at the end of curfew. And they may have been shot in the streets. So that was something which was stark. And I saw that at the age of 16. I couldn't understand that. And that was South Africa. And I was there for only, I don't know, less than 2 years before being then bounced out as a refugee to England. And that was the end of my African saga, 17 years of age. So very stark contrast between Rhodesia and South Africa, to be sure. So you asked me what's going on now, the antipathy between the blacks and the whites. I can't really speak to it. I just know that black-white thing was always really an orchestration. Of course, it became a cultural proclivity with the old Voortrekker stock of white skins who became, entitled. And the slaves were unshackled from their chains back in the day and then became the kind of worker. That's disgusting. All of that history is what it is. It's odious. But in terms of relations, foundational relationships between whites and blacks, my experience has always been that it's generally very even and level-headed until you get into understanding that these orchestrations are constantly taking place. The fomenting of divisiveness is a psychocultural program that is being driven, propagandized and driven. Yeah.
Question. This is definitely going on in our country currently. Was it done similar there? Did you see it like through the news, the press? Well, Greg's question was kind of weighted. He was asking if it was orchestrated, and you kind of alluded that the black-white animosity was orchestrated and had a purpose, and you picked up on that. And I'm questioning if this is kind of the situation here. It has been since who knows how long.
Since Obama.
Maybe even before that. But definitely there's rap artists talking that they were encouraged to promote gangster rap, violent rap, and they would be marketed further. Is this the way it was going down there? Was it through the media, television? How was it orchestrated? I mean, on the ground.
No,
do you remember? You were young, but
it's very, very different.
Okay.
It's very different. Let's just speak momentarily to America. Let's talk about Puff Daddy for a moment, because I think it's a very appropriate conversation right now.
Yeah.
Puff Daddy, Jay-Z, and this echelon of black orchestrated billionaires connected to Clive Davis and other supremo dark hat moguls in the basement of the Sabbatean / satanic / Luciferian basement. That stuff is as real can be. As real can be. Blood ritualism, sacrifice of innocence, midnight masonry, all of that stuff has been going on forever. What's happening right now is that the white Satanists are throwing the black Satanists under the bus, setting them on fire in order to create a decoy whilst they rearrange the furniture in the basement. It's exactly what the white deviants in Hollywood did to Harvey Weinstein. Harvey is not the bad guy. Harvey was never the bad guy. Harvey is the least of the bad guys. And Harvey Weinstein is not one of them, was not a practicing ritual Satanist. So this stuff gets very spooky. People don't want to go here. They don't want to pay attention, but they're going to have to, because in the next 12, 18, 24 months, it's all coming out.
All right. I do want to go there. I do have questions. So
I figured you would.
Yeah, well, see, here it is. When I was years younger, I had a nightmare. I personally have never witnessed anything of this thing. I had a nightmare. It was so vivid that I was going to be sacrificed and there was people around, and it was, I woke up, it was the most terrifying nightmare I ever had. And then a couple years later, I started hearing for the first time that this actually might be going on. And I certainly know that Satanism is going on a long time. I only recently heard about this. Well, it's been about 20 years, but it seems recent in my life. Tell me more about it. All right, the white Satanists throwing the blacks under the bus, and Harvey Weinstein. All right, Harvey Weinstein was thrown under the bus, but he certainly wasn't a loving, kind person to all female actresses. And is that correct?
That's
Well,
correct.
he's saying he's not the worst
not
of
a
the
Satanist.
worst.
He just wasn't. Yeah,
That's
wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't doing the
he was
blood.
bad, but he's not.
There is no
Correct.
crime. There is no crime in chasing starlets around sofas. Never was a crime, and there is no crime there. So if you want to level at him that he's a dirty old man, that's absolutely fine, and that's entirely appropriate.
Right, I agree with that. That's
But
most
was
of
he
Hollywood.
was he a loving man? Yes, very much so.
Okay. Did you
In
know him
his way, a
personally?
loving family man, with his children love him to death. Absolutely, I can tell you that.
Okay.
I mean, I know I'm connected there.
Okay.
So, and it was the Obamas and the Clintons almost certainly who were behind the takedown of their mate Harvey Weinstein.
All right. Are Obamas and Clintons really at the top, or are they just kind of like second or third tier?
And incidentally, I told that to Candace Owen, okay, when she called me on this particular subject last summer. So the white, it's a hard one. I don't particularly want to go there right into this area too deeply right now, because revelations are going to be coming out around Harvey, and the score is going to get settled very soon. I believe it's going to be later this year. I don't want to say too much on this particular subject, if you don't mind. But I commend the fact that one way or the other, your soul stream was connected to the story. I mean,
That's exactly what I felt like. It was more than a dream. It was connected to something really going on.
The reason I set up this Judicial Commission of Inquiry into human trafficking and child sex abuse is because I was forced into understanding how real that this subject is a cornerstone to our so-called civilization. And once you go there, you can't not go there. You have to lean into it, and you have to absolve somehow in your own heart and your own mind the fact that we have been living generationally in a world which is predicated on ritual sacrifice of innocence. It's a horrible reckoning to come to, because we like to think that we come from Tinkerbell, and that bad things happen, but just happenstance. No, they are deeply divine, orchestrated, appointed, and anointed acts of evil that have threaded their way from the time of Babel all the way to the current day. And it is incumbent on us to actualize in our day, in our time, and become the remedy, and shed the light and become the remedy. So that's, I commend you for at least reckoning with the truth of the horror in the basement there. And I wonder if you weren't having some even soul recollection of having been a part of that in the past,
Yeah, so there's two different, that's possible. There's two different things that were going on at that time. So one of the first jobs I ever had was working at a hotel. I'd set up banquet halls and conferences, and it was a police conference, and some group was touring with all of the stuff they've what's the word I'm drawing? I'm like, confiscated from all the arrests of Satan ritual, criminals. And so they only invited police officers. The only people that saw this crap was me and us setting it up, and the police officers. And the stuff that they showed was horrendous. So it is real. The police know about it. And a lot of times it's better for people to, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And so I did see that before I had the nightmare. At the time, though, there was a lot of speculation I was having of what was going on. I had taken the black pill, the year before, and didn't believe there was hope for America in the future. I'm starting to get a little hope on the horizon. But at that time, I believed really that the country was fully taken over by, Satanists, and it was then that I was having those dreams.
It was
At
up
one
until
point.
Obama's.
Yes, I agree. I saw there was a guy. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm going to say there was a gentleman in Russia and or Lithuania, and he spoke about the way he saw the West when he was in under the Soviet rule. He took a cigarette box and he poked a little hole and he shined up the light. He said that little height there was the United States. And he says eventually that hole got bigger and bigger and bigger, and Lithuania became free, and it was a very wonderful thing. That's kind of the way I've been seeing the United States in the past 5 to 10 years. I see a little hole opening up where their people's eyes are now it's a big hole where people's eyes are opening and the truth is coming out freely, and it's amazing. Where it's going to go, I don't know. Anyway, go ahead. I would like to hear more about you.
Well, I'm just, as you're speaking to that, I'm just going, Lithuania was not freed up at all. Lithuania was weaponized by the satanic forces in the European Union and the European Central Bank. I addressed the parliament in Vilnius in 2016. And you know, I was snatched out of my hotel late that night that I arrived by the former defense minister, who wouldn't even let me stay in the hotel because I was such a flagged up threat. And, you know, but it's a strange thing, isn't it?
Well, that was 10 years later. Now, 10 years before that, there was a lot of hope in Lithuania and a lot of positive things happening.
10 years before, yes.
Yes.
Understood.
So I was kind of even before my son was born, which was 2008. So definitely 10 years ago. It kind of, yes, I saw things changing of Lithuania because my wife's Lithuanian. I was going over there once a year. So things started changing recently. I don't know what it's like now. I've been there in 10 years. So, all right. Yeah, go on then.
Well, I've nothing more to say on that, but I was poisoned 2 days later in Oslo, and that for me, that's why I went on, you know, making the 5G apocalypse film connected to the 5G test bedding that was happening in Norway by best accounts. But you know, the whole of that part of Europe, they were trying, the satanic globalist elites were trying to hack into Russia through Lithuania for many years, failed to do so in the end, and Ukraine became the full frontal. So the whole Ukraine saga is really connected to how these same satanic forces, with the weight of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that $250 billion war machine are trying to literally ramrod their way into Russia and to bring about a destruction of Mother Russia. Because again, those satanic forces are well aware of the fact that Putin represents the gravest existential threat to their satanic agenda. They did this one time before with the takedown of Tsar Nikolai. I think we discussed this a little in one of our earlier talks, but the Bolshevik Revolution, which was fomented by Wall Street and the Crown of England, was the first time we did this, just over 100 years ago. And they've been trying to do it again through the Ukraine. Just anything but allow Russia to prevail. Why? Because the Tartarian genetics, the genomic expression that comes out of the Russians, the Eurasians, is the Christic blood. And if that's allowed to morphogenetically interconnect and then stand up, it means the ascension of humanity is underway.
What do you mean by Christic? Like Christ?
Christic, I mean, the same thing applies to the Nordic, but I'm talking about this aspect of the galactic genome, which is a preponderance that belongs to Eurasia, and as opposed to Africana, as opposed to Asia, you know, or Australasia. There are different primary galactic genomic expressions taking place in the different big drift regions of the planet. And the Russia in that sense represents on the musical scale or the harmonic scale of things, Russia represents the soul of humanity in simplistic terms. You could say that Ireland, England, anywhere between, you know, Glastonbury and the Stone of Tara represents the heart chakra, so to speak, of the earth. And so it goes on. There are different energetic centers of vortices, and the Russia represents the soul in that sense of humanity. So suppressing it, sublimating it, subjugating it, keeping it absolutely repressed, oppressed, and suppressed is paramount and has been paramount to the Babylonian priesthood, so to speak, for a very, very long time.
Good. I have a question, and there's about 6 different directions I was thinking of going, and I'm going to pick the one, since we're limited on time, that I want to definitely not miss. And the first is really, it's a comment that leads to a question. And my comment is something that that hit me when we had our last talk, and I didn't get a chance to share it. And I think it's something that you would like. And that is, we were talking about hot and cold electricity. I don't know if you remember that. But it occurred to me that hot and cold electricity have a lot in common with hot and cold fusion. Now, cold fusion, sometimes called low energy nuclear reaction. And I was thinking, what do they have in common? Well, cold electricity and cold fusion, both, the goal is to figure out what nature is doing and to just move with nature to make it happen. And you don't need to waste extra energy, that is heat, in order to do it. It's the Schelberger approach,
Right.
whether it's electricity or whether it's fusion. So I thought you'd like that.
No, that's
So-
very beautiful. And that's syntropy versus entropy. Simply.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that leads to my question. And we talked at the beginning of last talk was about Nikola Tesla. And my question to you was, what do you know about John Trump and his relation to Nikola
Yes,
Tesla?
this is an area interesting for me.
I don't know that there was a relationship per se. My understanding is that John Trump is a Tartarian. The Trump family are Tartarians. That's my take. The reason why Donald Trump's youngest son, is 9 foot tall is because we're seeing there a return of the Titan. We're seeing a return of the giant genetics. This is happening incidentally all around the world. The return of the giants is underway. You've got so many kids now at the age of 14, 15, 16 who are 7 foot, 6'6" to 7 foot tall, happening all around the world. That's a phenomenon which is self-revealing. I don't even need to go into it. But mark my words, in the days ahead, we're going to be seeing people skyrocketing, genetically skyrocketing, because that is also a part of the suppression that can no longer be suppressed.
What does skyrocketing mean? Does that mean
In
just
height.
like having
We're gonna
height?
get
shooting
statistically
up in
more.
height, doing
Yeah.
what skyrockets
We're
do.
going to
Go
see
up.
giants.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
bizarre. You see it here. Like, so it's like 2 parents are 5'10" and their kids are 6'6".
Yes, I've been seeing that too.
I've
been
seen that,
too.
like,
It's
what
happening
the?
all around the world.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, that leads me, you were talking a few minutes ago about the
Well,
galactic
I didn't,
genes.
forgive me,
go
Greg, I
ahead,
didn't
finish.
quite
Go ahead.
finish. I didn't finish. So Trump's uncle acquired, by best accounts, acquired the Tesla library, the
Yes.
Tesla papers, because he had a predisposition to that travesty of what occurred in Tesla's life. It was all about the Khazarians versus the Tartarians. The
So were some of those
Khazarians-
papers secreted? Do we have access to them? Where are they?
Donald Trump certainly has direct access to them. And I can tell you that the Khazar-Tatar phenomenon would have been exemplified on the day that Nikola Tesla made the mistake of going into the office of J.P. Morgan and asking for the financing or conducting business with J.P. Morgan. That was a freeze frame moment where you had a fat cat cigar smoking Khazarian motherfucker at the walnut inlaid desk, and you had a thin, gaunt, angelic Tartarian, very naive in that sense, Nikola Tesla standing in front of him. That to me is one of the freeze frames
Pivotal.
of history. And it's actually one of the slides in my lecture that I'm doing at the moment.
Okay, so here's my I guess another question. I'm the host. I have been for several years now at the Tesla Society conference, which is coming up in August. And you would be a great speaker there, by the way. But anyway, I know you're busy.
I've been there a
But-
couple times. It's a great time.
Yeah,
Great
well,
time.
Jeff and I
Where
both
is it? Where is it, Greg?
It's in
New Mexico.
New Mexico, yeah.
Albuquerque.
Yeah, it's been
No,
there. for
I'm going to
years.
be touring in the U.S. August, September. I would love to drop by.
Wow, well, I'll see if we can, I'll get you the dates and we'll correspond on it. But my question is this: we've been going year after year after year. Steve Ellswick, the guy who started in the 80s, and this stuff's been going on, and people are presenting their stuff, and we're making little minuscule changes, you know, and there are a lot of really cool things. Don't get me wrong, and the inventions are neat, and people are coming up with stuff. But in the back of my mind, I'm constantly thinking, are we wasting our time? Has this already all been discovered, and we're just kind of trying to rediscover what was discovered over 100 years ago? So I just want your take on that.
So, I mean, I love the question, and I'm going to see if I can. This arrived this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen,
This is a free energy technology. This is my team in Bucharest.
It will be on 220 or
So you're working on this.
That's a technology I'm on my way to see tomorrow in Bucharest. So we've finished the prototyping. We can 3D print a free energy technology, in this case, a hydroxy thing linked up to one solar panel. Fantastic stuff. We've got far more advanced technology than that, way more advanced, that we're incubating right now, that is outputting up to 30 kilowatts, using magnets, magnets that don't really need to be changed other than once every 10 years. You know, I know a fair bit about the subject. I'm deeply involved and deeply invested in the subject, but how we navigate it into the so-called marketplace, that becomes the great challenge. When you've got a satanic construct called a government, which is a mind control technology contained directly to the Draco reptilian, Zeta Reticulan constellations, and you have a bureaucracy of inane, soulless mandarins who are pen pushers doing just forcing statutory compliance, with a rigged executive in government, a rigged judiciary in the justice system, and you've got CE and UL certifications that either get granted or not, depending on whether or not you comport to Newtonian physics, which don't even exist. It's classic clusterfuck. No one can get a free energy technology into the market legally and lawfully. You see, that's the issue. And that's because you and I, and your audience, and my audience, have not yet pierced the corporate veil. We are still owned by the corpse, by the dead, by the corpse, the corporation. We are still allowing ourselves to be indentured by the corporation, masquerading as government. And until we stop participating in that feedback loop of taking the knee and rendering coin unto Caesar and filling out Caesar's little forms with block black capital letters and shuffling along and registering our babies at birth and registering our parents at death, whereupon those birth bonds and death bonds get traded anyway for years and years to come. You know, it's all part of this orchestration of the living versus the dead. And the problem is it would appear 99.9% of humanity are just not aware of the fact, you know, that we are the ones choosing to indenture our lives into a universal feedback loop where we are more dead than alive. And only once we have reached that collective threshold of a morphogenetic upshift, and we stand and no longer render coin. No one should ever pay personal income taxes, ever, under any circumstances. No one should ever render their signature onto a piece of paper to a stranger under any circumstances. No one should ever fill out their own name in block black capital letters. It's a satanic ritual. You should never do it. And yet we are cult programmed into believing that we have to do it. We have no choice. And so that becomes the collective meme that is the thrall, which actually programs death into our DNA.
I think Greg has one last question about reptilians. You had mentioned the other day that was one of your questions, Greg.
Oh, do
and
I?
I think we can end. Yes, you told me the other day we were talking about it.
I don't remember what the question
reptilians.
specific to that was, but
well, we got one last question.
Okay,
The question
yeah, I know. We're doing. Well,
is,
can I ask a different one? Is that okay?
Yeah, but I want to know the reptilian thing too.
Okay, well, then you go ahead. You ask your question, because I honestly
This
don't
is what.
remember that one.
All right. So we're talking. Greg's like, I wanted to ask him, when you say reptilian, do you mean literal reptilians, or is this in your vernacular metaphor of some sort?
No, it's not vernacular. I've
Okay.
seen one in the mid 90s. I witnessed one myself, what you would call an imperial Draco reptilian. And this is a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon which is well attested throughout the annals of history. It is only something which, alas, the mundane human who is stuck in psycho-intellectual torpor refuses to acknowledge, because they don't want to acknowledge things that don't exist within their conceptual framework. Their conceptual framework being about 3.5% of the visible spectrum of light. So the problem we've got is cognizance, cogitation, and the will for us to actually see real reality or not, or engage real reality or not. And most of us choose not to. And that is divine will at work there, free will. But the point is, reptilians are real. You have reptilian DNA in you. We all do at this time. Every human is a galactic hybrid by this time. Certainly, the Middle American is the most distilled galactic genomic commonality finds itself in Middle America roundabout now, which is why it is my insistence that the Middle American is the representative of the rainbow tribe, more so than anyone else on Earth. You'll find a distillation of all cultures, all genetic types in Middle America now. Black skin, brown skin, red skin, yellow skin, white skin have all been pot-boiled there. So the reptilian is an arcane galactic cosmogenetic aspect of who and what you and I are today. But the fact is that depending on the integrity of your bloodline, if it is a Draco, if it is a primarily Draco reptilian issuance coming through the bloodline, you can, if you have been part of these generational ritual satanic Illuminati families, if you have been generationally brought into the ritualism, then you will be able to activate through blood, and in some cases even holographically take on form and shape as a full-fledged reptilian. To be sure, we have the propensity for that. This is a multidimensional reality field. The one that we've dialed into here is a very, very limited one. But the fact of the matter is that pure blood Draco bloodlines exist. That's the whole Transylvania, the myth that's connected to the Nosferatu cult and the royal houses of Europe, the black nobility, and then the kind of pedestrian and suburban Satanists that exist all around the world as well, who were variously involved in Anton LaVey and his family were a classic example of that, still able to invoke devils in real time. People don't want to go there, but hardcore ritual satanic abuse and sacrifice of innocents, babies in the basement, does invoke full-fledged manifestation of Baphomet and Moloch tap dancing on the Masonic tiles in front of you and in front of the gathering. That happens to this day, albeit that stuff is definitely being dialed out. And that's to do with hyperdimensional physics and the changing in the fabric of our reality. We're swinging in deeper and deeper into the so-called photon band, the entire galaxy. And the entire solar system, on the fringes of the galaxy, we are impacting incrementally and exponentially this photon band, which is a plasma field. It's the breath of Allah, the compassionate, the grace of God, is now bombarding every living cell, atom, and molecule in our world, in our solar system, in our quadrant of the galaxy, that we are being enlightened from the inside out. And that's changing the vibratory permissions for lower elemental frequencies to manifest in the field. So the demonic, in that sense, is about to be dialed out of existence. Absolutely, alpha, omega. And all that remains after this bifurcation is the actualized angelic human at the morphogenetic level, which is the most important atom seed of the entire temporal universe. That's you and me. And that's one of the biggest subjects, if not the biggest subject, that I believe is going to come to the fore in the coming years, is the imperative nature of the resurrection of the angelic human and how vital it is, we are, to the fate of the entire temporal universe. It's not just a hominid species scuttling around on the surface of a planet in a Milky Way, in a galaxy. It is not. We are the epicenter. We are the cross. We are the crucible. We are the Grail. We are the Solomon's key. We are the Jacob's ladder. And all of temporal expression finds its way back home and to the light, so to speak, through the actualized angelic human. That for me is gospel.
What comes to mind for me is I think of the Bible, and I know your opinion of the Bible, but it talks about the sons of God came down and saw that the daughters of men were fair, and were these the reptilians, the pure reptilians, and did they create this mixed race, and we're all part of this mixed race? Is that what you're saying?
It's a great question, Greg. A yes and no is the answer in equal measure, because the Nephilim,
that clarifies it.
Well, by my understanding, the Nephilim were not the Draco reptilians per se. They may have been an aspect or an element or an offshoot of. I am not an expert on galactic genetics. I believe I will be more of an expert later this year because I'm going deeply into the subject and meeting with a great many minds far more advanced than mine in the subject. But Nephilim, fallen angels, it becomes a very, very nebulous area of focus.
Well,
Put it
most
this way.
ancient mythologies talk about that in the race of giants, and they have these weird creatures that are, half-breeds of all kinds of different stuff. And that leads to my next question. So obviously humans can mate with these reptilians, according to your view. Is it the genetics only that determine how reptilian you are, or can you become reptilian through some process after you're born?
We all have, the human being is, by distinction, the galactic hybrid. So that's the start point. We, hundreds of millions of years, forget everything you think you know from academia and or from the Bible, the Testament. We are hundreds of millions of years old. There have been multiple seedings of humanity, but you have to see it as being, the human is a hominid creature that emerges through the atom seed of Tara, of Earth, over billions of years. And that creature ends up becoming a grunting, squawking mammalian creature on the surface of the Earth, which contains foundationally the quanta of empathy, of the capacity to love and be loved, like all mammals. That creature then becomes genetically hybridized by extraneous intelligences out there, which come over the arcs of time and genetically splice and dice their own fashioning into that hominid. So the human emerges as a hybrid of all that is great and good of this earth plane and all that is great and good and advanced and extraordinary about the dielectric universe. So we have the paramagnetic and the dielectric coming together through the arcs of time and forming and forging in the crucible of this abyss, the human being. The atom seed of that human being will always be the direct conduit to Alpha Omega, to source consciousness, to God, so to speak, to Atman, as the Mahabharata would tell us. So that's why we are so vital. We now become the point of absolution for all of temporal creation as we move into a greater upshift of a higher octave of expression in the spiral of ascension. We bring all of those reptilians, all of those Arcturians, Andromedans, Zeta Reticulans, Alpha Centaurians, they all find their way and their expression through the Jacob's ladder of the human DNA. Once the human has resurrected as the angelic human. It does get very complex, the subject, but at root, it's very, very simple. The fully actualized human being is the resurrection of the angelic template, and that's what we will be witnessing in our lifetimes.
Now, you said you're not an expert. Who would you say is the expert on this? I'd like to see a whole podcast on this because I have a million questions and I could see it can go in many different. Who would you say? You said you're going to be diving into it. Who are you going to be studying under? Who are you going to be reading?
Again, this is complex because I speak to a multiplicity. I mean, I speak to in the course of this work, I speak to the Elena Danans, I speak to the Laura Eisenhowers, I speak to the Dan Winters, I speak to the Dave Emerys, I speak to so many of these people who are friends and colleagues, and I have been somewhat divining in the middle of all of these stories and creating a kind of distillation of the narrative. All I know, absolutely, based on my own prophetic envisioning that happened when I was very, very young, which set the signature and the course for my own life. And I've had that prophetic envisioning now corroborated absolutely by the wisdom flame of so many people that I sit with and speak with. I have a very clear idea now of the imperative nature of the angelic human, that we are the crucible, we're the Solomon's key, we're the Jacob's ladder, and that everything out there in our psychocultural landscape has always ever conspired to prevent us from entering into that knowing.
So who do you
That
mean
is
by
how-
we? We being the non-reptilians?
We being the great question, we being the realized, actualized humans who have absolved the aspect of the reptilian within our own DNA into its highest expression. So there's nothing wrong with having reptilian DNA. We all have it. We all have bird, avian DNA. That's the Quetzalcoatl. It's the half bird, half snake, half dragon. We have that in us. We are primarily a combination of avian and reptilian, the bird and the snake. That's the foundational piece underpinning all mortality. And coupled into that, these other elemental beings, some of whom are non-physical. So there's, again, it's such an extraordinary, rich panoply of expression that makes up the influence behind the forging of the human being. So there's also subtle planes of beings that are subdimensional, superdimensional, intradimensional, hyperdimensional, that influence us just as much as the physical reptilians or zeta reticulans or Arcturians. So we are the shit, the human being. We are the epicenter of it. We're the eye of the storm. We are the jewel in the crown. And that divine mantle becomes actualized only when we own it and when we are prepared to stand up and own it.
Question.
And that's kind of what's going on now.
Question. So I know where Zeta Reticula has come from. They come from Zeta Reticula. Where do the reptilians come from?
Well, loosely speaking, the Draco constellations. So
Okay.
loosely speaking, they're different star systems that within our ambit at the galactic level that are the closest influence to us.
Some time ago, they came in a spaceship and decided to settle here.
They don't even always come in spaceships.
whatever
Some
they
are
came
very
in.
advanced. They simply beam through the quantum, which we can do. And
Did it
even
in Star Trek.
human beings have the capacity to activate Merkaba and time travel. It's built into our DNA. We have that propensity.
Okay. So I have a quick question, and I hope this doesn't get too derailing, but when I was talking about, is it in your DNA? There is a process that I've heard about, don't know anything about it. I've just heard about this black eye club where people get this creature, which is a lizard, a vril that goes in through their eye and kills the host and takes over. And is that a reptilian, or is that something completely different? Or do you think that doesn't happen at all, or what?
I don't know. I've not witnessed it. I've seen it. I've read
You've
about it.
heard about it.
Of course, I've seen the photographs. What I've not done yet is sat down and met with anyone as a whistleblower or as somebody who has firsthand experience of witnessing that particular ritual. I have to say it resonates with me. It
Okay.
sounds very, very
So does that
probable.
person who is taken over by a vril, is he
Yeah.
that at that point he becomes reptilian? That makes sense to me, if there's any sense at all in this
Greg,
stuff.
most
but I don't know.
Daleks muttering to themselves in downtown Chicago or Manhattan, people, on the street who are drinking meth and are muttering to themselves are also demonically possessed.
Sure.
People who are, in normal relationships and just psychotic or neurotic people are variously being demonically possessed. I mean, demonism is happening in the pedestrian sense all the time, all around us. Bad decision making, ugly behavior in a barroom brawl or in a nightclub or anything, people effing and blinding each other in the traffic. That's momentary demonic possession, be sure. And, we all have an access portal at the top of the spine, base of the neck, at the top of the spine is the kind of primary access portal. As we willfully conduct wrong action in our lives, if we willfully conduct wrong action in our lives, we incrementally open the access portal and grant permissions to any number of these lower
That's how
elemental
people get
intelligences
possessed.
to come in. Yes, until one fine day, we just push it over the envelope and have that, that pill or that, crack pipe or that, flagon of whiskey, too much. And then that's it. We've now abnegated and abdicated our soul sovereignty. Now it becomes a serious matter where the demon can literally walk in and out at its will. We've lost our privileges in that sense. Then normally what happens is the higher aspect of soul comes in and invites a catastrophe in your life, like a car accident or some horrific scenario, which is a wake-up call, inviting us to shock ourselves back into soul sovereignty. So we give ourselves a lot of leeway, but ultimately it's all a matter of will. And we see play out in life how some of our fellows choose to bifurcate out of this realm and to perish and move into space dust, come back as something else, alas.
How are we doing, Jeff? Can I ask one more question?
Please.
Okay. You've talked this time about galactic DNA, and last time you talked about a galactic audit. And I just wanted to know, what is this galactic audit? Obviously, somebody is auditing somebody else. So, and how do we, based on this, what do we do with this audit, and when does it happen, and how do we know if we passed?
The audit in that sense, that particular galactic audit that I make mention of, is a phenomenon that occurs at the midpoint of every grand procession of the equinox. And again, you have to see time as being, in that sense, the grand procession of the equinox, 26 odd thousand years.
I wish I could do that.
And then halfway through that is the galactic plane. And as we pass through that galactic plane into the galactic night, which is the lower arc, is the galactic night, we pass again through the ecliptic and then go into the galactic day. So it's the galactic night, the galactic day, galactic night, galactic
Right,
day.
I get it.
That midpoint and that midpoint become the places of the audit, because that's where the hyperdimensional plasmoids from the 0 point at the center of the Milky Way are breathing in and out.
But who does the auditing? That's my question.
We are doing the auditing.
We're auditing ourselves.
Yes, we can only ever audit ourselves.
Okay. Before I get into questions, so I just want to quickly say, you were talking, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago about Tesla. And I just wanted to say that Jeff, I don't know, you may not know this, but Jeff is an inventor himself and has come up with some devices that are pretty amazing. You can see some of his videos from a long time ago. The Jeff
I have them right here if you'd like to see them.
Yeah. So I invite you to take a look at him. He's really an amazing guy. Anyway, I just bragging about you, Jeff. Have to do it. Okay, I guess I would like.
Let me show it really quick. You brought it up. Let me show it.
Okay, I did bring it up.
I'll show two.
Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, so this is a Zeta launcher. It's a toy. It's got a little car in there, and put the lever in there, and you shoot it. and it shoots about 25. Oh, the camera's not on there.
Wow.
Shoots about 25 miles per hour out of there. So it just basically uses magnets. You bring it in there, and it kind of just sucks in, locks in, turn it, and shoots out. Just for fun. It's a physical therapy product, so kind of good. It uses magnets. I call it an inverted gyroscope. Got a patent on both these, and it's really good for the neck, arms, carpal tunnel, shoulders.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, this is really good. This is my
You should
favorite.
get him one, Jeff. You got something you can.
Nope. They well, so this is all, actually, believe it or not, this is all cold cast. So I had a carved. It's kind of cool little decoration in the middle, little spiral there,
Fantastic.
and then it's got like rubber on the edge, and but it's cold cast. So basically, it's resin. I poured it myself and sanded it my hand. I made a bunch of them, but because they're resin, they were only prototypes. Oh no, initial limited edition. When they drop, they get a little crack, so it needs a bit stronger plastic. So they sold them, everyone used them, and they break them. I think I got the last one that's out, and my son was born with medical issues, and I had to close up the business. So, it was very
Wow, I understood that. I'd love to look into that.
Oh yeah, no, it's a great product. I got lots of videos. I think you can go to Orbflex, YouTube Orbflex, and you'll see some gym exercises. Couple girls and a guy doing the different exercises. So pretty cool.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
All right.
Jeff's a cool
Yeah.
guy. All right.
Right,
Here, I guess my last question, getting back to the reptilian stuff. So some people, we all have according to you, have a little bit of reptilians. Apparently some have more than others.
Yeah.
So are there certain groups of people that have a more reptilian than other groups?
Yes.
What are those groups?
Those live in Minnesota. No.
So this is where my firsthand experience
All those
matters
Polacks.
to me. I've met with members of royalty who have expressed to me, people connected to those lineages and to the Illuminati lineages. I've sat down with them. I've counseled on occasion a handful of individuals who, a couple of whom are public and would be very readily recognized names, who are born into these generational Saturnian Illuminati families, and at a given point are required to enter the family business or enter the compact, and then witness stuff that spooks the shit out of them, whereupon they have breakdowns and don't know if they have what it takes to cross the line. And that's the point at which I have been brought into conversations / counseling with a handful of individuals.
So you
Over
try to
the
coach
last-
them into becoming,
I'm sorry?
you coach them into becoming Illuminati, or you
No,
coach
he's
them out of it? What do you-
helping them after it's already happened.
I'm helping them to understand what they're experiencing when it comes to shape-shifting,
Oh,
when it comes to...
but you
the
yourself
change-
don't do it.
No. Well, I mean, if I do, I'm not aware of it. I could ask the same of you. No, I'm not. I've not done any shape shifting that I'm aware of, and I don't have, contrary to popular belief, I don't have Rothschildian or Rockefeller blood. I've read that a few times, but I believe I'm fairly steeped in the angelic human presence. I think that's my chosen genetic expression is coming more from that
Well, if
space.
you don't have that experience, why do they come to you for help? That's
Because I
interesting.
have made it my business over many years to speak boldly, which most people are too chicken shit to do. People are too afraid to speak to truth in this world. You know that. Everyone cowers behind their armchair when they're not filling out tax forms. I have a long and very publicly attested, I wouldn't call it a career, but a predisposition of speaking truth to power, and of hacking into the basement, and of trying to make sense of a blood cult that governs our world. And it's my work, my humanitarian work or activism work has been very much about full frontal truth and disclosure to the best of my ability. So that builds up a certain renown. And if I'm also moving amongst royalty and amongst leadership and political leadership and diving in and out of those corridors of power in the works that I've done in diplomacy and so on, I get a reputation, obviously, and then that reputation is brought to the attention of certain people who are going to listen to what I say and have a bit more, because what I say would have a bit more authority than just a layman who's a conspiracy theorist reading blog threads. I'm out there not reading anything at all, having conversations and being on the front foot and inquiring into life and leaning hard into life. The Lazarus Initiative is a testament to that. The International Tribunal for Natural Justice and the judicial commissions of inquiry that I have financed and I have founded and manifested at great cost oftentimes are a testament to the fact that I lean hard into inquiry. I care about the truth. I care about the outcome. And so that builds up its own repertoire. And then people reach out and say, can so-and-so would like to speak with you. And I've met with political leaders, and I've met with Illuminati members of Illuminati families. In some cases, people who married into them, then seen stuff happen and freaked out and tried to exit. And then I've had those conversations. A couple of films that I've made are pretty famous. The one with Ronald Bernard, the Illuminati central banker, which has been seen by millions and millions of people. That's out there. That was a number of years ago. So that's an example of why I am trusted by certain echelon who know that I'm likely to have answers for them that they can't get elsewhere.
I think Greg was wondering maybe you were involved with it and had some personal experience. I guess now I'm wondering
with what? With what?
just being knee deep in Illuminati bullshit. So I mean,
I've never been invited. I've never been invited to join the Masons. I've never been invited to I've never even done a drum circle. So I'm not the kind of person who accepts invitations to anything. I don't like clubs. I don't approve of them. I don't approve of secret societies. I think they're venal. I think they are, all of them, surreptitious and nefarious. I think anything encrypted and hidden is wrong and does not stand under central sun. So no, I'm not a member of the Illuminati. I've never been invited, but I have had multiple conversations with people who have come to see me who themselves are involved variously. And I would say that they're very interesting conversations because they're people who are good people and are in that, tiptoeing into that realm as far as they're concerned with the best will in the world. I have then had arguments with individuals like that and said, you cannot be of the light if you've got your foot in the door. It's not possible. It's one or the other. You have to choose. So I inhabit the indivisible line between the black and white checkerboard on the Masonic table, so to speak, because I know that that they both think that they're doing the right thing. In a sense, they both are adulating their gods. And at the end of the day, the checkerboard on the kingdom of the devil becomes a counterpoint between Luciferians and Satanists. Those
They're not the same?
They're not the same at all.
No, they're not the same.
They're the opposite oftentimes. And this is the problem that the mundane mind doesn't understand. They throw everything in and says all the same thing. No, it's not all the same thing. 90% of royalty are good humans born into privilege who themselves don't understand how the fuck they got there.
Like Prince Harry and Prince William.
Even more, 90+% of political leaders are also groomed into play without even knowing who their handlers are. They just have preference. And same thing with captains of industry, born into these privileged dynastic families. They're simply born to it, and they have, preferential share options put in front of them every Monday, which they're asked to sign by the handlers, and they sign, and they have another windfall, and their hedge fund moves to another 5 billion in value. So that's more or less how it happens, where the people who are the top of the capstone of the pyramid are not the problem. They've just inherited or landed somewhere. there's a technocratic sliver, like I said in our earlier conversation, beneath the
Yes.
capstone that separates the capstone and the body politic of the pyramid of power. And that technocratic sliver is where the Midnight Masons, so to speak, interpose themselves and their influence, and then disconnect the body politic from the capstone, so that there is no executive instruction or order that gets through without it being blocked, intercepted, and then deviated.
So I have a question, if I can, on the. It sounded like Greg was surprised that there's a difference between Luciferianism and Satanism. From my understanding, Satan, Beelzebub, and Lucifer are all the same entity with different personalities, kind of like in Christianity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, so the triune. So can you, and it may be different from your view, and it's definitely different from others, but they definitely have different personalities. Can you explain the difference between Satanism and Luciferianism? I have an understanding, but I want to see if it matches.
Yes, the rudimentary distinction between Satanism and Luciferianism is that Satanists conduct blood rites.
Yes, okay, that's exactly what I see. And then Lucifer's all about being light and, well, you explain.
Yes.
Actually, go ahead.
Yes,
the first one agrees with me. Yes.
It's about power. It's about the assumption of power, dominion through power and glorification and so on. So the Luciferian, you put it this way, you'd want to have dinner with a Luciferian, you wouldn't want to have dinner with a Satanist.
Okay. Except that, okay.
And you could even go so far as to say that the distinction between the Khazarian and the Tartarian element in the human family is the same distinction as between the Satanic and the Illuminati and the Luciferian.
Okay, Greg, you had a
Light
question.
seeker.
I feel you have a question.
Yes, I do. Well, it's just a follow-up. I just want a clarification, and that is, on the one hand, I know I've heard you many times say, talk about the Illuminati as effers and a-holes, and they're the worst of the worst. On the other hand, they like you. They come and they hire you to come and, counsel them when they're having problems. So I'm having a hard time, I guess, resolving that. How does that be okay in your world?
You're never gonna, I think, hear my answer if because I've answered it multiple times. I've said
Okay. I'm just an idiot. Sorry.
I have it. Well, in this particular question, you're not in your highest truth, because I've just said I inhabit the indivisible line between the black and the white.
Right.
Because that's what any smart human does. You end up recognizing this is a dualistic binary shit show of a plane of existence. And the best thing to do is to attain a state of grace or serendipity, which is to say non-judgment. Non-judgment is where we approach the capacity to absolve and to redeem. The capacity to absolve or redeem allows us then to transmute and transcend. So that is the simple language in kind of chemical or alchemical and scientific terms. That's why I position myself there. I'm not judging these fringe Illuminati people. I absolutely welcome conversations like that. I welcome the capacity to absolve fear, trepidation in my fellows, because that's my chosen dispensation in life. I'm a war child.
So would you draw the distinction between those who are performing satanic rituals and, sacrificing children and all that?
I've never had a conversation
even they can be absolved. Is that?
I've never had a conversation with a practicing Satanist, so I can't answer that question.
Okay, so
I've had a conversation with generational Satanists who have turned the corner and have come into the International Tribunal, for instance, and given testimony. Jay Parker is a famous example of that, a very famous example, Jay Parker, and one of the most extraordinarily beautiful souls you'll ever meet. Ronald Bernard is another extraordinary example of that. Mark Passio is another extraordinary example of that. Kathy O'Brien, one of my closest friends in the world,
name was popping
one of the
in my
greatest
head.
examples of pure angelic being. But how did Kathy cross the line from being a generational, ritual, satanic, pedophilic family? How did she become an angel? Well, Mark Phillips.
Yeah, somebody stepped in and yeah.
Mark was the one who helped transition her and absolved her because he cared enough to face her and receive her. And so, the business of standing on the indivisible line and receiving without judgment becomes actually the point of absolution, Greg. And again, if you care about truth, as I do, and pure inquiry, as I do, then you are forced to have conversations with entities that you do not particularly like or resonate with. But if you care about the answers to those questions, you have to sit and have those conversations. And I've happened to have done it thousands of times. And that's just how my life has evolved. So you're seeing a middle-aged man here who has foregone the joy of having a family and having children in the pursuit of what I deem my noble path. And it's not fun and roses. It's oftentimes very, very injurious and very, very hurtful and very, very saddening to be someone who's simply constantly leaning into truth and scouring the basement and trying to understand and listening to the testaments of people who have had girls who've had their wombs taken out in satanic rituals and devoured by the congregation whilst they're still alive and managed to survive. There are things that go on that you cannot even wrap your imagination around. And in the pursuit of true inquiry, in understanding, and then wanting to shed light onto these areas of tremendous epochal darkness, it takes light bearers to do that, and light bearers cannot judge and must not judge.
I want to back up your argument. I'm going to come to your defense, not that anyone's attacking, but I totally agree because no, Greg, you were not. You were just asking. I definitely agree because you have to understand that most of these Satanists, they have been mind controlled at a very young age. They've been blood ritually traumatized, and they are doing the bidding of the one before, and it goes on for generations.
Hurt people.
Yeah, so they really, you can sympathize, and it's very easy to put judgment on the back burner. It does need to be stopped, and they are doing horrible things, but they a lot of them, especially in the act, I mean, they're full on possessed at that point, and full on possessed people, they have a very, very long spiritual spiritual war ahead of them if they want to get out of it. They just don't leave. It's the rest of their life they're going to be fighting it. So they do need to be helped. They do need to be helped.
Beautifully stated, Jeffrey, and you're absolutely right. And look, it's like this. At this end of times that we're living through right now, at this great bifurcation, this great harvest that's taking place, the souls that are being born into these generational satanic families are oftentimes angelic avatar souls who have descended in to the realm in order to become the point of absolution for those lineages. There are many, many people who have got stage 4 cancers that are lying in agony right now in hospital beds because they have chosen as angelics to come in and close the lineages and absolve the ancestral traumas of bloodlines. We have to start to see life and reality in a very, very different way. We've got to have a very elevated stance in the way that we see reality and nowadays, and recognize that everyone in front of us is in a sense on their noble journey. The Draco reptilians are no longer governing this earth plane. In fact, I have it on some real authority that they've all been extricated and are no longer connected to this world. The overarching forces no longer on this plane of existence at all, subsequent to 2020, 2021. And I believe that that's absolutely the case, energetically, incidentally. Now we just see a lot of resurrection, the will to resurrect from the trial of separation, billions of souls. There's a bifurcation underway connected to the genetic interventionism of the vaccine program, which is going to see this bifurcation happen. A lot of death, a lot of shedding in that sense, energetically. So we've got to steel ourselves, for what's ahead. But what's ahead, to be sure, in my view, is extraordinarily beautiful. And I believe all I see ahead is beauty and grace. And I do think that possibly this year there's going to be a few more frighteners put on humanity. I think that is almost likely between now and midsummer of next year. I would personally suggest that midsummer of next year, 2025, is the point where we absolutely depart the kingdom of the devil, and we collectively start steering reality into its patterns of perfection.
I'd like to just, and we may be toward a close here, but I believe it or not, Sacha, I'm going to agree with what Jeff said and kind of what you were saying too. I just want to put it in different words. And that is, I believe, first of all, from a Christian perspective, there is no sin that anybody can commit that can't be forgiven by God. And I believe that, including some really, really awful stuff like you mentioned. So, and also I just want to kind of circle back to the very beginning of this conversation about Sacha Steele, Robert David Steele, which was, and again, I know we really came down on him hard, but the reason I liked him in the first place was because he talked about truth and reconciliation, which is kind of, I think, what you're talking about. And maybe that's what attracted you to him in the first place. I mean,
no, it's what attracted, is go and study his narrative. It's what I was educating him on that. It's the other way around.
Okay,
I have a 25-year record of this work.
Okay.
Since I formed Humanitad Foundation in 1999.
I heard it from him before I heard it from you.
Yeah, but he's certainly a quick learner.
I'm on board with that concept. And like you said, the very worst sins can still be forgiven. And it's I'm totally with you on that.